Hey guys, Jessie Schuler here, your local real estate agent in Central Florida, and today we are going to be talking about return on investments, also known as ROIs. Now, I am just going to be focusing on actual investment properties, both short-term and long-term rentals, and ROIs pertain to that. But please remember that your primary home, even though it's your primary home, it's still an investment. And depending on where you are in your life, whether you're a first-time home buyer, you're an empty nester, ROI is important, and I'll do another video another time on that. But this one is going to be specifically focused on actual investment properties. Now, what is ROIs? It quite frankly is the definition. It's the return on your investment, how much money you make off your investment. So whether you sell it right away, whether you sell it in 100 years, whether you're using it for monthly, long-term revenue, long-term leasing, you're gonna make a little bit less within the year. I like to compare short-term and long-term to like a sprint and a marathon, right? Short-term rental, it's definitely a sprint. You're trying to get as much people in there as possible, get as much turnover as possible, so you're making more per month, especially since there's off seasons, right? And then the long term is your marathon. You might not make, quite frankly, I tell people if you're breaking even, you're doing well in a long-term rental, especially if there's an HOA, which down here almost everything is, because you're probably going to pay a property management company to handle it. So on top of that, in your HOA, if you're breaking even or you're slightly making money, bonus. So you're definitely looking at them differently, which also means you're gonna be looking for different things when it comes to ROIs. So let's start with long-term rental, because I just find that to be a little bit easier. So long-term rental, like I said, that is more of a marathon, right? The location is important, but it's not nearly as important as a short-term rental, because you don't need to worry about vacationers aren't going to be using it, right? Because long-term rental, usually you have to have at least a 6-month lease, or a lot of them are 12-month to be considered long-term. You might have snowbirds come down, but that's still going to be part of your long-term rentals, right? And this is somebody's home while they're staying there. So you certainly want it to be in a good area, or like a decent area, right? You certainly don't want to just buy a very inexpensive home in a really bad neighborhood where people won't feel safe. So that's something that you really have to keep an eye on too, is even though, again, like short-term rentals, you're trying to get a ton of people in there per month, per week, all of that. Whereas long-term, you're just trying to consistently get it leased out every year. And it would be a bonus if you have a good tenant that wants to stay in there multiple years, right? So the location is a factor, but again, you just want to make sure you're in a good neighborhood. It's not high on the list. The condition of the home is a higher concern. You don't want a home that you have to put a ton of work in, because the more time that you have to spend putting work into the property, the longer it will take to get a renter in there. And your renter is basically paying your mortgage for you, right? That's like the whole purpose. As long as they're paying your mortgage, you're good. You're earning equity on the home. The longer it sits, the more equity you're earning. So it is, and you're paying down your mortgage note. So you want to make sure that it's not a complete fixer. You want to get someone in there, maybe a few like cosmetic fixes, but nothing that's going to hold it up from being leased for a really long period of time. Speaking of HOAs, you probably don't want to be in an area that has a really high HOA. If you have a really high HOA, you really can't charge that to the people staying in it. So that's all coming out of your pocket, and it's coming out of your potential income. And sometimes the HOA can actually make you owe money every month. So if you're having to pay like $50, $100 extra of your money because the person that's leasing it is covering the whole mortgage, but they're not covering the HOA fees on top of it. So something else that you really want to keep in mind, you want to make sure the HOA isn't too expensive. However, it still could be nice to have the HOA to be in an area that has an HOA, because a lot of times they'll have some things that your tenants might like. They might have a pool, they might have a park, some walkability, and the HOA, their job is to kind of keep everything, the value of the homes from going down. So that's always a positive. So something to certainly keep in mind as well. Now, when you're thinking of a short-term rental, your thought process is a little different in terms of ROI, right? Because you're not going to get your return in like several years down the road like you would with a long-term rental, right? Like long-term, you're basically trying to get that filled every year, pay down as much of your mortgage as you can, and then when the market does like something like it just did, where it is an insane seller's market and things are going over ask, that's when you sell. And like my husband always says, you never lose until you sell. So even if the market's like taking a plunge and there's an influx of inventory and it's really hard to sell and values are a little bit lower, you don't have to sell. You get a renter in there, you're good to go. But you don't lose until you sell. So that's like the long term. So a short term, as far as ROI, you're trying to get, I mean, it's quantity over quality here, right? You're trying to get as many people in as possible. So location is probably the most important factor. You want to be somewhere that's close to the attractions. And in Central Florida, what is that? It's the theme parks, it's Disney, it's Universal, it's all of these things. So you want to make sure that you are not too far, because there are families that will come that do not have a car. They're not going to bring a car. So you want to make sure you're close enough that they can Uber and they're not paying an arm and a leg to Uber. But you also want to be in a house that ideally has a garage, or I'm sorry, a driveway, so that people who do drive down and bring their family and do the coolers and do that have somewhere to park, because you're going to have it's a harder time having people book your room or book your house or your property if you do not have a driveway. So something to keep in mind. Another thing as far as ROI, these are all things that you want to make sure you're thinking about to get as many people in there as possible, right? So like number of bedrooms, super important. How many people can you physically put in there? You might want to get a pool, and there is extra additional liability with that, but a pool is going to get more people in there. Is it handicap friendly? Oh my gosh, so much more attraction to that. So location, huge. Layout of the home, single story versus 2-story. Also, again, for handicap, elderly people, you just have to think about these things. What do most people want? Open concept, because they're on vacation, right? They're not going to spend all their time in this house. You have to just make it as comfortable as you can. So I've covered 2 so far. So the long-term renter, the important things, the things with ROI to help ensure ROI is you're in a good neighborhood, you don't have a high HOA, but you possibly still do have an HOA just to help ensure that the value of the neighborhood isn't going to go down because of bad neighbors. It happens, it's a thing. So HOA in general could be good. And then just keeping the home in good condition so that you constantly have a renter in there. And then with the short-term renter, it's definitely a location. You want to be close to the attractions. You want to be close to all the places that they want to go. If they don't have a car, you want to make sure they can Uber. You also want to make sure you have those little things that people want, like a driveway, multiple bedrooms. Maybe if the furniture is included, which it should be for a short-term rental, the couch is a pull-out couch. All of these things help ensure that people are going to book your property as opposed to someone else's. Now, the last is flippers, which is probably like the biggest people who look at ROI, because that's like the whole thing, right? Like, I'm buying this house to fix it up and resell it. So what are some things you want to be looking for? So it is almost impossible to know the next up and coming area. Like realtors nobody knows. It's all, but then sometimes it can happen really fast and you kind of miss the mark. But some things to look for if you are a flipper, you're trying to find a house to flip and you're trying to find out an area that is going to potentially like have a growing, I don't know the word I'm looking for, like has a big growth, right? And the value is just gonna skyrocket. If you see a ton of new construction happening, that's a really good sign that they're building up the area. And not just new construction in terms of residential, but new construction in terms of commercial, restaurants, coffee shops, gas stations, grocery stores. Grocery stores are huge. If you see a new grocery store going up, it's a really good bet that they're building it because there's a lot more residential going up in the area. These are big things to keep in your mind when you're looking for these things. Also, areas that have large pieces of undeveloped land. What do you think that land is going to be used for? there you go. That's what it's going to be used for. So if you're looking in an area that already has a ton of buildings and residential neighborhoods and restaurants and bars, and there's not a lot of undeveloped areas, it's probably like, it doesn't mean the value is not good. It just means like you're probably not going to see that huge jump, right? You want to look for areas that have those big pieces of land. Also, if you're not that far from like major attractions, whether it's like a stadium for sports or the theme parks or really, I mean, it's going to be those new construction. That is like the big thing to look for. So those types of people, the flippers, look for these pieces of land, but it can be tricky because you don't want to do it too soon where it hasn't grown yet, and you're gonna not only have a hard time getting someone to buy it because it's in the middle of nowhere, but the value hasn't gone up yet. So you're flipping something and you can't price it too high because that's not what the comps show. You know what I mean? So it could be a little tricky with that, but that is certainly something that you want to keep in mind when you're looking for these places. Again, you never lose until you sell. So you can buy it cash, flip it, rent it for a little bit, and then sell it. Like, you have all of these options with that. You also need to look at what homes in the area are selling for that don't need a lot of work. So if this house is listed for $200,000 and other homes in the area that have the same square footage, same bath, same bed count, those types of things are selling for like $400,000, that's great. Now, what's the next thing that's the most important? How much work does it need? So if it needs, let's say, $50,000 worth of work, well, you have a potential ROI of $100,000, right? Because it was listed for $250,000 of work needs, so that's $250, and homes are selling for, okay, $150. I'm not good at math. You have a potential ROI of $150, $400,000 minus $250. So those are the things that people look for. And you want to make sure that the amount of work doesn't take a long time to do, because a lot of people who flip don't pay cash. You get, there are special financing you can do for flips. It is a higher interest, but less down. And the more months it takes, the more that just eats up your profit. So also something that's really important with ROIs. So basically, the long and short of, you know, helping to ensure return on your investment is knowing what kind of property you're going to have, whether it's a long-term rental, a short-term rental, or a flip, and knowing those key things to look for in each instance to help ensure that you get a good return on your investment. So that's all I have for you guys today. Please like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. If you have any questions on this video or a previous video I've done, please leave those in the comments, and let's see what you can do for you. Until next time.